Let's head on now to our guest for this morning. Joining us live here in the studio is human rights lawyer and Akbayan party list nominee, attorney Chel Diokno. Welcome to Morning Matters.
Thank you for having me, Gretchen, and good morning to everyone.
Thank you for waking up with us. Okay, let's first start with that story on education. We are in the midst of an educational crisis, and the latest EDCOM report came out already in the second year. You want a 6% portion of the budget dedicated to education. Why 6%? How did you come up with that number?
Well, that's an evidence-based number. So I didn't just come up with that number out of nowhere. That's actually the recommendation of the United Nations, that all nations should strive to put at least 6% of the gross domestic product into education. And I think that we really need it because of the education crisis that we're undergoing now.
The PBED called for a comprehensive plan for candidates to have a comprehensive plan for education to address this deep problem. What would yours be?
Number one, of course, is increasing the budget, but number two is making sure that the money allocated goes to the right places. It was very sad and actually so concerning about the reports that came out last year that out of so many thousand classrooms that were supposed to have been put up under the previous Secretary of Education, only like 200 had been put up. And so out of how many 6,000 classrooms that were supposed to be repaired, only several hundred had been repaired. I'm glad to hear from your report that the DepEd has, under the new Secretary, appeared to address that problem.
How do we have a stronger oversight over how money is spent in the DepEd? We were arguing about this in previous interviews that Congress does have power over the purse, that bukod dun sa paggawa ng mga batas, meron din siyang kapangyarihan na siguraduhin na nagagastos ng tama yung budget. Tama po ba yun? And what to your view is the way around it? I mean, how do we strengthen our hold on the budget that is being allocated to education?
You know, totoo yun ha. Congress does have the power of the purse. But I think that Congress must be more transparent when it comes to how it comes up with the budget. Everything is on record in the lower house and in the Senate until you reach the BICAM. Then when it reaches the BICAM, things get murky. And I think that we have to have some reforms that will address that, because transparency is so important to accountability.
Speaking of the BICAM, actually, it's not just the insertions, because there is actually there were charges filed by several personalities to the Office of the Ombudsman, questioning the 241 billion insertions into the budget. But there's also the unprogrammed appropriations part in the BICAM that were inserted, and makikita natin yan dito sa PhilHealth when they were mandated by the DOF to return the excess funds to the Treasury to support the unprogrammed appropriations. I mean, what can we do since the BICAM is not actually in the Constitution? It is a creation by both chambers of Congress. How do you think can we strengthen also the oversight on the BICAM?
The Congress has rule-making power. So why not make more transparent rules for the BICAM? I think that will benefit everybody, especially those who are in power, because then they can say, wala naman kaming minagic dyan. Talagang everything is for the people. And that's also what the economists are complaining about, because sometimes they study the budget from the National Expenditure Program submitted by the executive. Everything is fine, but when it comes out after the BICAM, ibang-iba na.
Meron nga pong proposal na mag-live stream din doon sa BICAM.
Why not? I mean,
but you're also asking public officials to account for themselves in the same way that you're asking for political dynasties in government to pass an anti-political dynasty bill. Hindi ba mahihirapan tayo doon?
Well, iba yung political dynasty bill. Alam naman natin yung kahirapan yan, the challenges that law faces. But the budget is the budget, and that's our money. So I think we are entitled to know how it's spent, especially when it reaches that bicameral stage.
What would be needed to make that more transparent?
Well, my understanding of the BICAM is really to tweak what's presented by both houses. But what's happened, especially in the last budget, is there were major, I would say even radical changes made in the BICAM. And I don't think that's the purpose, kasi if that happens, then they become like a super legislature, which was never intended by the Constitution.
You're right, because the BICAM was created to meet in the middle with the version in the Senate and in the
Yes.
lower house. Right? So, gagawa tayo ng batas, or it's just amending the House rules on that? Is that easy?
I think both houses should look at their rules
Okay.
and come up with a common stand as far as the BICAM is concerned.
Babalikan ko lang po yung question dito sa edukasyon. Kasi sabi ni Senator Bam Aquino, former Senator Bam Aquino, he proposes a free college education law. What would the difference of that be between RA 10931 or the Universal Access to Quality Tertiary Education? Ano po yung pagkakaiba nung sinasabi po niyang free college education law kung meron na po tayo nun sa ngayon?
Sorry. Ang pagkaalam ko dyan is what the Sen Bam wants to do is to strengthen the existing law. There are some issues that have come up since the law was passed. And I think that hindi lang doon sa naririnig ko sa kanya, it's not just the free education itself, but it's the other expenses that students need to have in order to avail of it. And for me, pushing the youth agenda, this is something that we in Akbayan are really for, because we have to have a clear plan for how our youth are going to take over the country. Right now, there are so many issues. For example, 25% of our young Filipinos are out of school. That's a big, big number. And government, both the legislature and the executive department, must do something to get them back to school and to make sure they finish.
To which Finance Secretary Ben Diokno said before that this is unsustainable. I mean, giving free college education because there are actually 4 out of 10 dropouts. Yun po ang sabi niya. I mean, if you're taking a look at the budget, we have a limited pie, and the different pieces of the pie are fighting for a budget. Taking a look at the whole situation, do you think that that is the priority, or is it other aspects of education?
I think we have to look at all aspects of education.
Pero dun sa EDCOM 2 report, ano po ang tingin po ninyo magiging priority dapat?
Tingin ko yung content, what we are teaching our children. Basic education is so important for values. It's so important for how you are going to function as a citizen of our country. And yet we don't really see that much in our basic education. For example, one thing I'm pushing for is that we teach voter literacy at a very young age, so that the phenomenon of vote buying, the issues about how votes are not valued by some of our fellow kababayans is addressed at a young level.
And how do we, I mean, you propose that we talk to them about elections and what constitutes vote
we
buying?
explain to them that the ultimate expression of your freedom is your freedom to vote. We won't be a real democracy unless we can address that problem.
We've been seeing you a lot on TikTok dancing. And in 2022, I do remember that you said that dancing is not your forte and that we can expect you to talk about issues instead. What caused the huge change in tactic? Bakit po kayo sumasayaw ngayon, in short?
I have to thank all the young Filipinos who interact with me. Sila ang nagturo sa akin kung paano sumayaw sa TikTok. And you know, it's a lot of fun because you are given a new avenue for expressing yourself and pushing your advocacies. Even if the TikTok itself where I dance may not have an issue involved, once they get curious about me and they see my other videos, then hopefully they will be more enlightened as far as the law is concerned.
But dati, may sinasabi ng mga kritiko, puro sayaw lang naman itong mga kandidato na to, candidate A, B, C. I mean, aren't you putting yourself in the same plane as those candidates?
Sinasabi ko rin yon na wag lang sana nila iboto yung mga marunong sumayaw at kumanta. Pero ako naman, marunong din man ako magsagawa ng mga gandang batas.
So yun po, kumbaga, ano. I mean, do you think that's working for you? I mean, with your numbers currently in the surveys?
Well, number one, I want to thank you for the opportunity to clarify to everyone na I'm not running in the Senate. Hindi po ako kumakandidato bilang senador. Hindi niyo makikita yung pangalan ko sa balota. I am running under the Akbayan party.
Correct. With the numbers of Akbayan, I mean.
Well, the numbers are okay. I think we can still, there's room for improvement. But we're in the running as far as the numbers are concerned.
Okay. You are running as first nominee of Akbayan party list. Does this mean that you align with its principles, and what are those? Ano po ang sinusulong ng Akbayan?
Oh, definitely. I've been working with Akbayan ever since I was in practice, probably more than 20 years already. And the same issues, the same advocacies that I have been pushing for as an individual are very much aligned with what Akbayan has been pushing for. For example, issues that concern accountability of public officials, issues that concern not just transparency but empowerment of ordinary people. I really don't see any difference in what we're pushing for. Education, pagdating sa education, pagdating sa healthcare, pagdating sa issues of social justice, pareho lang naman ang advocacy namin.
Where do you find yourself in the political spectrum? Are you opposition, traditional opposition, alternative opposition? Ang dami pong mga terms eh. I mean, nasaan po kayo doon?
Well, I'd like to say that I am issue position, meaning that it all depends on what the issue is. Mahirap yung sasabihin kong opposition lang ako dahil makikipaglaban ako kahit sa anong dahilan. Every time there's an issue, I think everyone involved in politics must look at the issue itself and ask himself or herself, where do I stand? Where does my organization stand when I talk about this issue?
But sino po yung mga kaalyado po ninyo dito sa issue position or I mean again in the political spectrum? Because if you take a look at your colors, you are wearing mint green. If you take a look at former Senator Kiko Pangilinan, he is, I believe, green, mas darker green. Meron ding dilaw, meron ding pink, meron ding... Iba-ibang kulay po kayo eh. I mean, isn't that too fragmented? I mean, you were Ocho Derecho before, mas consolidated po yun, and this time around, you're running under different colors, different banners. Don't you find the need to consolidate and to strengthen your base? Probably take advantage of the pink movement back in 2022 to get their support behind you to actually win.
I think that's more of a challenge for the senatorial candidates who are running. For example, Senator Bam and Senator Kiko. For party list, it's more of being able to push the identity of the party list organization, move on the ground, and in my case, let people know that I'm running as a party list nominee.
Get 3% of the votes. But nung una po, kayo po ay tatakbo sana bilang senador. What made you change your mind?
It's both a practical and a principled decision. I had really been planning to run for the Senate. In fact, I had gone out with Sen Kiko and Sen Bam last year. But when the opportunity came to be the first nominee of Akbayan party list, it was really, really hard to let it pass. I know how difficult a Senate race is because I've done it. I've been around the block twice. I know that for candidates like myself who don't have access to huge resources, talagang dehado ang mga kandidatong progresibo. And running under Akbayan for first nominee would really be something challenging, which was inspired actually by the political journey of Senator Risa Ontiveros, because she was twice a Akbayan party list representative in Congress before she became a senator.
Will she be campaigning for you, joining the sorties and the rallies?
Yes, and I'm so thankful for her support. We've been around for some time already, but I truly enjoyed San Risa, our Tondo run. It was an eye-opener, and it was something that I think was a good way to kick off the official campaign.
Kung sakasakali po kayo po ay manalo ng Congress seat, what laws would you like to push for? I mean, with your background as a human rights defender and yung mga nabanggit niyo po kanina.
Well, maliban dun sa nabanggit ko kanina, in terms of human rights, what I'd like to push for is a PNP Discipline Act. I think it's been very clear that the present system of discipline in the Philippine National Police is not enough. It has not been able to address issues of discipline. And we have to bring it out of the Philippine National Police, bring it to a civilian agency. There's the Civil Service Commission or any other agency that is totally independent, no ties at all with the Philippine National Police. The PNP is supposed to be a civilian force. So
But don't we have the NAPOLCOM already to do that?
We have the NAPOLCOM, but if you look at the numbers, especially when you talk about the war on drugs, the extrajudicial killings, there were so many cases that were not even looked into, where the PNP personnel involved admitted that they were killed, yung mga nanlaban na case, when ordinarily those should have been really heavily investigated, because you have a death and you have members of the police admitting they used lethal force. So therefore, you don't want the police to get used to using lethal force against their own citizenry that they're supposed to protect. You want to make sure that each and every case is clearly justified on the part of the police.
And who would compose this body that could investigate? I mean,
We
could
have a
discipline
body
the police?
already. The Civil Service Commission is supposed to be the body that
Yun na po yun.
enforces discipline all over. And civil servants, kasama doon ng PNP. Aside from that, we have to have, this has really been a long time in coming, we have to have a death registration law. Di ba meron tayong birth registration law where everyone who's born, their identities must be recorded. But we don't have a similar death registration law. We don't have a law that requires autopsies, for example, when you have suspicious deaths. When, for purposes of law enforcement, that is so important. For the families, when members of the family disappear and they have no way of finding them, if we have a record, if we require some kind of identification or even taking of tissues for DNA identification, that's something that will help our country in a big way when it comes to issues of human rights.
I'll take you up more on that discussion. You just need to take a break. We're just getting into the meat of this conversation. We are still with Akbayan First Party List nominee, Attorney Chel Diokno. Morning Matters, we'll be right back. Welcome back. You're still watching Morning Matters, and we're still joined by Akbayan First nominee, Attorney Chel Diokno. Let's talk about human rights. No journalist killed in 2024. That's a report by Committee to Protect Journalists. Do you think the human rights situation is better under this Marcos administration?
That's a very welcome development, especially for journalists like you. But I think that the government must also revisit its overall policies when it comes to fighting in terms of political issues involving, for example, the left. Yung isang problema kasi is that yung practice of red tagging, for example, has really gone overboard. Na kahit sino na lang ngayon ay pwedeng ma-red tag. Judges have been red tagged, members of the bar, teachers, other professionals, students. It's been a way of making people think twice before they
So hanggang sa
speak.
ngayon, it's still a prevailing problem. Isn't that in the previous administration?
Hanggang ngayon, nakakatanggap pa rin kami ng mga reports. Especially when I go around campuses, I get asked a lot by students.
But comparing the two administrations, do you think the human rights situation is better, a lot better?
When you talk about extrajudicial killings on the war on drugs, we're not seeing the numbers that we were seeing before. And this administration has expressly said that they will take a different approach when it comes to the war on drugs, which is very welcome. When it comes to issues involving environmental defenders and human rights defenders, I think there's still a need to find ways to provide more protections to them. one of the bills that we're pushing is the Human Rights Defenders Bill, which I do hope will become a law soon.
Your father was imprisoned during the Marcos regime, Marcos Senior regime. And I do remember you also mentioned that you will not demand an apology from the Marcos family for the atrocities during the martial law. Did you expect this from the son? I mean, for them to pivot from the Duterte administration?
Well, they really have different styles, and I think the President Duterte's style is very unique in our national history. I don't expect that someone like the current president would be able to replicate that kind of style. At obvious naman sa dala-dala niya na iba nga ang dating nila.
Meron po kasi nagsasabi na parang yung mga liberals seem to be a little bit more aligned with the current administration in terms of meron ba kayong kumakausap sa inyo na possibly get alliances going?
No, I've never had anyone approach me about that.
So wala pong ganon?
Wala.
Okay. Let's talk about the investigations into the war on drugs. There is a proposal in the House to reopen the investigations. What is the feasibility of creating a credible investigation into that? Considering that we have our own law enforcement being investigated here, you have had experience of dealing with a victim of the war on drugs. How has your experience been, and how do you think that will go if we reopen those investigations at the House level?
Well, I think that there's still a lot more that can be unearthed by any investigation, including the one being conducted by the House. There are a lot of data that has been surfacing about the war on drugs that came out in the Quadcom hearings. There are also issues, I think, that must be addressed in terms of how can we make sure this doesn't happen again. The two bills that I mentioned earlier I think are steps in the right direction. But there's also a bill that Akbayan filed by Kong Percy Sandanya, which adopts a two-pronged approach to the war on drugs. When it comes to drug lords, the people bringing in drugs into the country, those who really profit from it, they have to feel the heavy hand of the law. There's no choice there. Doon talaga kailangan tutok ang ating pamahalaan. But when it comes to issues involving addicts and users, I think that the better approach is to treat it as a health problem and to not treat them as criminals, but rather bring them into the health system so that they can be rehabilitated. It's been done in other countries, and it's been successful in other countries. I think the best lesson we can learn from the war on drugs is that that kind of war will not work.
The Duterte administration has kept on saying, nasan yung kaso? Nasan yung kaso? Mag-file kayo, mag-file kayo. What are the challenges in actually building a credible case?
You know, I've spoken to hundreds of relatives of extrajudicial killing victims. They all want justice. But when I explain to them what they can do, pwede po tayo mag-file ng kaso, criminal case, civil case, the same question pops up. Paano naman kami, attorney? Paano kung babalikan kami? Paano yung mga anak kong iba o yung asawa ko? Baka sila rin ay patayin. And as a lawyer, I really cannot provide any assurance or guarantee that that won't happen. And I cannot tell them, hindi pa mangyayari yun, because I don't know if it will happen or not. And ultimately, that becomes the deciding factor for many relatives, because they want to protect the rest of their family, and I don't blame them. Kaya that's one of the reasons, in fact, why we joined the ICC. Is because when you're facing, for example, top officials like the president of the country, how can you expect justice in the Philippines when your witnesses will be afraid to come up, when maybe even the independence of the magistrates may be in question if they were appointed by the very same president? That's, in fact, why I believe we should return to the jurisdiction of the ICC para may fallback tayo. I'm not saying that all cases should go there because they have the principle of complementarity. Kung kaya talagang ikaso dito, dapat dito yan.
What do you think about the government stance now? They have adopted a more favorable tone towards the ICC, particularly the Interpol. I mean, what do you think about how they're dealing with the ICC and the investigation?
Very welcome development. The real litmus test is going to be if and when the ICC issues a warrant of arrest. That's when we will be able to determine what concrete action this administration is willing to take.
Kasi doon na mag-serve. At the question is, paano ma-activate ng law enforcement
Doon
to
na
carry out
magkakaalaman,
those
oo.
arrest warrants? Speaking of carrying out arrest warrants, we had Attorney Jimmy Bondoc on this show the other day, and he was saying that Pastor Kibuloy is the face of injustice in the Philippines. Siya ang mukha ng kawalan ng hustisya sa Pilipinas. What would you say to that?
No, I don't think so. He's been given every opportunity to defend himself. He has lawyers galore. I'm sure he can afford a whole battery of lawyers, and they will surely fight for him when the trial comes along. Yun naman yung pinakapuso ng due process, di ba, na mabigyan ka ng pagkakataon na i-defense ang sarili. And there's no issue there as far as Apollo Kibuloy is concerned. He will have his day in court. It will be an impartial judge who will decide the case, and he will even have the right to appeal.
Okay, but he also mentioned that there were egregious violations of human rights in the way the arrest warrant was served at the KOJC compound. I mean, taking a look at what happened there, it was a 16-day hunt for Pastor Kibuloy. Nakikita natin parang there are reports of tear gas. Meron ding reports na may mga nasasaktan na KOJC members. I mean, you as a human rights lawyer, do you think wrong acts were committed there?
Well, first of all, I cannot comment specifically on those incidents because I understand they're under litigation. But more generally, anytime there is a use of force by members of the police, there may be issues of human rights involved. I've had many cases where excessive force was employed by the police, and we did pursue both administrative and even criminal charges against the persons involved, the members of the PNP. So, dapat lang merong pananagutan. Pero that should not also divert us from the issues of accountability being demanded by the victims of the Kibuloy organization.
And how do you think that could have been done better? I mean, yun nga, nahanap nga si Pastor Kibuloy doon sa KOJC compound. Pero, what was the better way of dealing with it? I mean, it's always a balance, right? And it seemed to me like they were pushing the limits of the law. And both sides were pushing the limits of the law, defending KOJC, defending their compound, defending their territory. And on the other hand, the police trying to serve their mandate. I mean, is it always like that? That there are bound to be human rights violations? Or is there a better way of carrying this out?
I don't think that human rights violations always have to happen when there are police operations, especially of that magnitude. Ano kasi, parang ang nagiging knee-jerk reaction ng PNP natin is binabraso nila when there are more sophisticated ways to address issues like that. I think here, the help of technology, although we got reports that they did use certain equipment to try to track Kibuloy, but you have to develop a scientific approach to these kinds of problems. Number one, kailangan ma-cultivate mo yung relationships with people inside, because that's really how police agencies operate. You have to have good intelligence. If you don't have good intelligence, how will you know where to...
And their intelligence was actually that he was in the compound, that he was just there, nagtatago lang sa mga tunnel. Given that intelligence, parang hindi po ba dapat hanapin? Actually, hindi yun ang argument kasi hindi raw search warrant ang meron nila, kundi arrest warrant.
Well, even an arrest warrant allows you to knock and to enforce the warrant in a home, provided you follow the proper procedure. What perhaps where we might have benefited from would have been some help from technology-wise from other countries that would help us locate. Because I know that, for example, the United States, even probably Japan, have the equipment, more sophisticated equipment that could identify, for example, yung mga terrorists sa Afghanistan, kung nasaan sila nagtatago. And we could have employed that kind of equipment here if we had thought about it better.
Okay. You are running again as first nominee of the Akbayan party list. Your numbers have dropped in the most recent survey. What is your plan on campaigning?
Well, the numbers have dropped just a little bit, and that provides us with more incentive to work double, triple time. I've been going around the country. I've been meeting with a lot of young people. We've been embarking on a campus caravan. Hello sa mga estudyanteng nakausap ko na at yung pupuntahan ko in the months to come. It's really exciting, and feeling the pulse of the Filipino youth is something that I truly enjoy. I hope that we can...
But some argue that we don't really have a youth vote.
Well, not in the way they talk about it. But take note, just recently, the report came out that 63% of our registered voters for 2025 are millennials and Gen Z. And the biggest jump are the young voters. We only had something like, if I remember the figures right, 11 or 13 million Gen Z voters in 2022. That figure has increased like by 7 million. So you have 18, 19 million more or less. Very young voters, some of them first-time voters, very idealistic, who I believe can be harnessed.
Taking a look at the top party lists in that survey, naalala ko nandun ng Tingog, ACT-CIS, FPJ, Bayanihan. These are all backed by strong political families or figures already. Contraday has released findings that 55% of party lists are actually either from a political dynasty, galing sa contractor, o malaking business. Hindi po ba parang, what kind of fight are you facing here? And also, what amendments would you propose to the party list system?
It's a very alarming phenomenon that we were seeing in the party list. And it's something that talagang lumayo tayo sa intention ng party list, because the real intention of the party list is to provide sectors who don't have a voice in Congress. What amendments would we need? We have to go back to the law itself, the party list law, and tighten it up. Make sure that it is limited to sectors that really are not represented in the lower house.
And how do we do that? How do we strengthen the law itself? Because sabi po nila, hindi naman kailangan galing dun mismo sa sektor, ang kailangan maging membro kaya for 90 days. I believe that's it. And yun nga parang what kind of words should we put there to make sure that they do come from sectors and the marginalized?
Tingin ko dalawang safeguard yan. Number one, we redefine who can be accredited as a party list organization. And doon pa lang, we can limit it to those who will represent the marginalized. Second is, we look at who can sit as nominee, who can be nominated. Ang maganda sana, something that I would push for, is to ensure that the persons who sit really and truly are part of that sector. Hindi lang yung sumali lang ng 90 days tapos gano'n na.
Sabi naman po ng COMELEC, inimbestigahan nila. Tinignan nila yung track record, binusisi nila, kaya 40 plus na lang ang nakapasa. Sabi naman po nila yun. And yet, we have those findings from Contraday.
Yeah, nakakabahala talaga. It's a challenge as well in the party list. It's something that I wasn't really aware of when I ran previously. But now, we're seeing a lot of things we have to overcome.
And you, who do you represent again?
I represent Akbayan party list. We are all about love of country, and we are epitomized by Senator Rizal Tiveros.
All right, thank you so much for joining us and giving your thoughts on the latest top issues for this day. We have human rights lawyer and Akbayan Party List first nominee, Attorney Chel Diokno on Morning Matters today.